Hey everybody, this is iLad, and I would like to welcome you back to my Starmade tutorial series. In this series of fairly short videos, we're going to be exploring mostly Starmade logic systems, but also Starmade ship systems, and introducing people to the wonderful world of making really interesting crap in Starmade. So in my last video, we discussed the very basics of Starmade's logic system, and I promised to go over logic gates in my next video. So here we are. In this category on the hotbar, it groups together your basic logic controls, and then in this category, it gives you all your logic gates. There are a couple other blocks that are also grouped in with these, and I'm going to go over those first just because they're grouped together in this build category. They're not technically what I would think of as logic gates, but they're very useful to know, and I think we should spend some time going over them. It won't take long. So the first up, we have this flip-flop. The flip-flop is a block that acts sort of like a little 1-bit memory register. Basically, it remembers its previous state, and it only changes state when it gets an on signal from some sort of logic output. So you can see that when I activate a logic block, either logic block, it flips and changes from off to on. Now when I deactivate one of these blocks, the flip-flop does absolutely nothing. It has to receive an on signal, not an off signal. I can also do this with buttons, and unless I mention otherwise for the remainder of this tutorial series, just assume that buttons are going to activate things the exact same way that activation blocks do. Buttons are a little easier to use with flip-flops because they do turn themselves back off again, allowing you to almost immediately send a new high signal to toggle its state. Then we have delay signals. What a delay signal does is receive an on signal and then turn on a half second later, and then when it receives an off signal, it turns off a half second later. You can chain these. And that may illustrate better what they actually do. You can loop them. You can take the output of the last one in the chain and put it back to the input. Notice that the final delay goes off simultaneously with the button that you output it to. That's because the button itself is not a delay. Yep. I'm going to switch this over to an activation module, which is going to stay on until I tell it to go off again. And you can see that the delay signal is going to follow suit. This brings us to our first of the actual logic gates, which is the NOT. The NOT reverses whatever signal is put into it. Now, typically you have to cycle these, because if their original output is already off and the NOT is off, then they're matching up, whereas they should be opposites. You can see now that we've got an actual loop going on, whereas this one becomes on, it switches the NOT off, which switches the activation module off, which cycles the loop. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense to you. If not, maybe a few more experiments will clean this up. Let's get out of the delays for a minute. So, let me just show you a NOT in isolation so that you can clearly understand what it does. When this is on, this should be off, and when this is off, this should be on. Switch, 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 switch. If we tie the NOT into a button, which turns itself off after a half second, You can see that while the button is on for that half second, the NOT is off, and when the button is off again, which is its default state, the NOT is on. Then we have our next logic gate, which is an AND. This is very relatively simple logic gate. Let's see, let me disconnect these. Connect this to this. An AND will put out an ON signal if and only if all inputs connected to it are also ON. So if I press the button, the AND does not trigger. If I turn on the activation module, the AND does not trigger. But if I have them both on at the same time, the AND triggers and it stays on for as long as all inputs are on. Let me replace this button with an activation module and we'll have a longer signal. Now it will stay on until one of the inputs, either of them, turn off again. Now, as I said, the AND depends on all activation modules or all buttons or all inputs being on. Oops. There we go. So 1 is not enough to do it. 2 is not enough to do it. 3 is not enough to do it unless all of them are turned on. Okay. And again, it doesn't matter which one I turn off. It's going to turn off. Very cool. Let me go ahead and switch. Whoa. Let me go ahead and switch all these off. Then we have our OR. ORs behave very differently from ANDs. An OR will switch on no matter how many or how few inputs are on, as long as at least one of them is. Get our signal light up here. Turn it off. Yep. Aha! So an OR says if this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, out to the limit of however many inputs you have, if any of them are turned on, it's going to turn on. If more than one of them are turned on, that's fine. And I can turn off some, as long as at least one is still on, the OR will be on. Only when they all go off does the OR go off. Let me go ahead and plug a NOT into this 4-input sequence. As I demonstrated in my last video, sometimes you have to cycle things to get everything working properly, but once it's all synced up, all these are off, so the NOT is on. If any of these turn on, now look what's happening. It's not quite the same as a backwards OR, because let's say I have all 4 of these on, and then any of them turn off. That is actually going to activate the NOT, which is kind of weird. It's not how an OR would behave. So that's, I would call this an unexpected behavior. Like, whatever, it's fine, it's predictable, so you're going to be able to use it. But it's not what I would think would be ideal. Now, with the combination of those 3 gates, the AND, the OR, and the NOT, you can build some incredibly complex stuff. Let's go ahead, I'm just going to drop our signal light way over here. And we're going to see what all we can do with these. So one of the slightly more advanced logic gates we can get into would be a NAND, N-A-N-D, and that stands for not AND. Basically, we can plug these both into an AND signal, plug the AND into a NOT signal to invert its output, and once we get everything cycled so that everything matches up, what we'll have, there we go. What we'll have is a signal that is on when both inputs are off, or all 4 inputs, or all 27 inputs. It is still on when any number of inputs less than the total are on, but it will be off when both or all inputs are on. So basically it is an AND that is inverted into a NOT. It'll only be off when the AND is active. That means when all inputs are. This is useful, or one of the ways that this is useful is in building what we call an exclusive OR. You saw that with the straight up OR signal. Let me build one real quick. It's on, see, there we go. It's on if one input is on, and it's on if all inputs are on. But what if you only want to make it so that it will trigger if one but not both inputs are on? Like, this should be an off state, this should be on, this should be on, and this should be off. You can do that by combining an OR gate and a NAND into an AND of their own, which is a very confusing way of saying it, so let me just build the dang thing. So we're going to connect both of these to an OR. Yeah. We're also going to connect both of them to an AND. Connect the AND to a NOT to make it a NAND. That NAND will output into an AND, and the OR will output into the same AND. Now, when you first place this down, you have to cycle through at least the side with a NOT on it. NOTs generally have to be cycled a bit. So to do that, I need to get this AND active and then deactivate it again. There we go. Now we can do our demonstration. So if one of these is on, this is on because it's an OR. This is on because the AND it's connected to is still off. Since both of those inputs are on, this output is on, and that'll activate our whatever, our light in this case, right? However, if I turn both inputs off, even though this is still on, now the OR is not active because neither this nor this is active. So the OR turns off, AND is off, our output is off. Yeah? What happens if I turn them both on? Now this NOT is no longer active because the AND it's inverting is active. That means that where it outputs to this AND, it doesn't get a signal from both inputs, and so we've deactivated that. So there's your exclusive OR. The phrase exclusive OR means it will activate if one or the other is inactive, but only exclusively one or the other, not and or. Does that make sense? Maybe taking a slight step back in complexity, we can do a NOR gate, and that is going to trigger only if neither input is on. So this is going to involve an OR plugged into a NOT. The NOT will be plugged into and the NOT will be our output. It's going to take a bit to get it cycled since, the NOT's always placed inactive, but now that we're in good shape, both inputs are off, output is on. If either or both inputs are on, output is off. This is how I would have expected the NOT gate to work. As you can see, it's a very, very simple adjustment just to stick an OR block in before the NOT. This is called a NOR. Basically, this is on if neither this nor this are on. We can do an exclusive NOR. This is basically an inversion of the exclusive OR gate. And guess what? We can do it by inverting the output of an exclusive OR gate. So I'm going to rebuild this. We've got our OR over here. We've got our AND over here. We've inverted that AND. This NOT. The NOT and the OR point into an AND. The AND points into a NOT, and the NOT is our output. So I've got to cycle this to get everything in the right place. There, it should be right. So the output is on if both of these are off or if both of these are on. As soon as one of them is on, the output goes off. Again, it's nothing more than an inversion of the exclusive OR. So there's just some basic logic gates. I learned all this stuff the hard way. You can do all this stuff, for instance, in Minecraft. I learned it in Starmade first because it's actually easier since you don't have to build an AND out of multiple components, right? And then once I understood that, I was able to transfer that knowledge to other games like Minecraft, where building ANDs, ORs, and NOTs is a little more intense. But you can do some incredibly complicated stuff with this, especially once you start throwing flip-flops and timers into the middle of it, or flip-flops and delays rather. So hope that helps you out. Hope that gets your logic signals sorted out. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this has been instructive for you. If you would like to see more tutorials, I invite you to go down and click the subscribe button because I am going to be producing more of them. I'm going to talk y'all all through various logic configurations and functions. The next video is going to be a tutorial on the various sensors found within Starmade. And those are very useful for figuring out the current state of your ship or station and outputting various logic signals based on that. So, hope you're looking forward to that. Again, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. And I'd love to see you back. Thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.